Dr. Colin Zhu, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Thank you guys for having me.
You're welcome. Do you have a moment of gratitude to share with us?
Sure. My moment of gratitude would be, my family. Very, very lucky to have them in my life in varying capacities, but just constant reminders of who you are, keeping me grounded and humbled. So definitely for my family.
I see you post a lot about your family on your Instagram, and I love that because it shows that you're a person with a really big heart, and I think your heart goes out beyond your family, and that shows in the work that you're doing. And you had an amazing looking Thanksgiving, plant-based Thanksgiving happening, and I was watching like the video of it on Instagram, and I was like, oh my God, I know where we want to be invited for Thanksgiving next year. And
Yeah,
Funny.
that was a good holiday. So.
is your whole family plant-based, like parents and siblings and all of that?
No, actually. So I grew up in a Chinese household, first generation born to immigrant parents. And, being Chinese, we just, I think there's a common saying that we just literally eat everything that moves. But Asian cuisines are very well balanced, and I was very fortunate enough to have both of my parents cook growing up in the kitchen. So I was very, very comfortable. Usually Thanksgiving, Christmas dinners are usually hosted at our families back on the East Coast in Northeast New Jersey, United States. But I'm currently in Los Angeles right now. So past couple of years, our families have expanded, and so we just had our cousins just kind of hosted it. And to answer your question, no, not everyone is plant-based. I've been plant-based since 2014 after my first marathon, and my family, half of them went more healthy, and I think my father probably just kind of stuck with it, and he just would just have to cater towards, if we go out, we would have to compromise going out in some restaurants, and he would go to his and things like that. So no, not all my family members are plant-based, so that presents challenges, but also presents opportunities to cater towards people who are, in different categories, whether they're interested, curious, or wanting to learn more. So,
And they will eat plants. So they like there's lots of vegetarian dishes, lots of vegetables that go through the Chinese cuisine.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Chinese cuisines are very balanced. Like for example, yin and yang. We take that to heart, and something that we practice prevention. Making sure that we're just in homeostatic state. So that includes. For example, like celebratory events, it's very important to have, a fish dish, a meat dish, lots of vegetables. And so it's like representative of everything that's like balanced in your life as well. So it's very on a macro scale from that point of view. So, yeah.
When we lived in Hong Kong, we noticed that for sure. And we also noticed that most Asian families, when they're eating, they use the meat not as the main dish, but more as a flavoring option. And when you come back to North America, it's the complete opposite. Like the standard of American diet is just out of control.
We got invited to a student's house for dinner, and they were giving. I mean, it's going to sound it sounds disgusting now, but it was very aged beef and very
Oh,
high quality
Yeah.
beef. And we were like, awesome. And then it was like three little slivers on your plate, and we looked at each other and I'm like,
This
what's
was
he? What's
before.
before we were plant based? Of course, I'm like, what's he gonna
Yeah, what
eat?
am I going to
Because
eat?
like
There's nothing on
we
the
were
plate.
expecting like Texas style steak, and so yeah, thinking back, it is more of a garnish, more of a side dish than it is like the main course. So it's great to see that there is an abundance of vegetables in that kind of cooking. So having that all those other things at the table and important, what brought on a plant-based lifestyle for you?
Well, being in the medical field, you have access to research and the evidence behind it. And I think plant-based being a more new moniker or name and trend and movement is usually, it's been something that's been, around for some time, in addition to kind of like the pillars of, just optimal wellness and health. So I don't think anyone could disagree about needing more plants and vegetables and fruits in your life. It's more about, okay, where does the research show, and what are we, how can we highlight it? I think it's just not something that's highlighted, like for example in our cuisines in North America, it's just not highlighted. So it's more about public perception, and having more of the research now that's more in the forefront. It's bringing that to mainstream. So, and you can see that with the trends of veganism and plant-based and everything in between. So
Can I ask when were you in med school? Like what years ish?
I was in med school between '06 and 2011. Typically, medical school is 4 years in training, at least in the United States. I took an extra year to stay back as a teaching assistant, so it took me 5 years.
Yeah, so I think that's so interesting of how things have changed because we interview a ton of doctors of a variety of different ages. We don't often we haven't interviewed too many doctors that have graduated within, let's say, the last 10 years or so. But to hear that you were exposed to it, through your medical training is
Was you
really
though? Were you exposed to nutrition in your medical training?
or,
I
or the
didn't hear
no
that.
what I heard is that you have access to the research, and I think that there's more research and the research is more readily available, and as younger doctors are looking for how to balance their practice, balance their education, get more of an edge to beat out other colleagues or students or what have you, because this information is on Netflix now and it wasn't on Netflix 20 years ago. There's more of an opportunity for you to be exposed to it and learn it on your own, I guess.
But let's be clear, you weren't learning that information through your med school classes, correct?
No, no, no. So my interest in just general wellness really stems from my mother. My mother is a Chinese medical doctor. She's a licensed acupuncturist, and she's been practicing pretty much close to 4 decades. And she practices in Staten Island, New York. I didn't have any MDs growing up. And so she was the main person that influenced me in terms of getting myself into medicine. And initially, I wanted to combine East and West. That was very interesting and, very unique. But as I went through medical school training, I became more interested in nutrition and more interested in food after I graduated medical school. Probably similar to other guests you probably had on the show, a common theme is there's actually not a lot of nutritional and lifestyle related education in our curriculum, which is very true. And so because of that, lack, I had around like maybe 10 credit hours of nutrition. It was mainly just biochemistry, but there was nothing speaking to culinary attitudes and behavior and skill sets and learning your way in and out of a kitchen or supermarket and things like that. And so I graduated off cycle because I stayed back as a teaching assistant, and I had a 9 month gap. And, I said to myself, what am I going to do in that 9 month gap? And so, people would do more research to beef up their resume. People would travel. For me, because I became more interested in nutrition, I wanted to learn more about the source and root. So I went into culinary school. And lucky for me, I enrolled myself into a school that was more health supportive and plant-based, as opposed to schools that are more heavily foundationed in French technique. So
Less butter and fat and all of that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but to answer your question, I did not learn it through my medical training. I actually had to seek out and put myself, through conferences and workshops and read and, all this other stuff. So it wasn't presented. We're hoping that it will, be more a part of the curriculum, the lifestyle education, culinary medicine, things like that.
So was it while you were in school or was it afterwards that you were able to take part in the published article, Community Culinary Workshops as a Nutrition Curriculum in Preventative Medicine and Residency Program? And no, I didn't memorize that.
I was like, that's pretty good. No, so that one was a pilot study that was done that I helped contribute with the Johns Hopkins Preventive Residency Program. It was between the periods of July 2006 and April 2017, and that was more of a community type of curriculum that residents were required to participate. And what happened out of that was they had weekly community classes with the neighborhoods of Baltimore, Maryland in the United States. And so part of that was nutrition and being able to counsel more about lifestyle behaviors. Part of it is cooking. And so I was asked to, lead 3 workshops. And out of those workshops came questionnaires and assessments and things like that. And so they created a pilot study off of that data.
And is that what was basically what pushed you into combining your medical degree and your culinary experience? Or did you already kind of have that idea?
That was a lot later, later on in my career. So I went to culinary school after medical training, which was around 2011, and I graduated in 2012. And at that time, I wanted to use the education to kind of enhance my medical career, and I went into family practice right afterwards. Studied and trained for another 3 years, and then that puts us around 2015. And then from there, I started practicing as a traveling doctor, or locum tenens in Latin. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, for your audience members, it's really kind of like a contracting doctor, almost kind of like a substitute teacher. And you kind of go around and help out clinics or hospitals or offices where a doctor is not available at the moment in time, whether they passed on, maternity leave, go on vacation, sick leave, something like that. And so I, participated in this for about 4 years and traveled to and practiced in 4 different states in the United States. But I used culinary education, my lifestyle medicine education and training to not only incorporate it into my one-on-one counseling as a family practitioner, but I also do workshops and demonstrations. So that's where I mainly put my training and education towards. And the study is a product or outcome because of that.
And, I think that people need to learn how to read studies properly to make sure that it's good research. Is there anything that you would have done differently in the research to kind of make stronger outcomes? Not to create stronger outcomes, but to have the outcomes be even greater or anything like that?
So with every research study, there's always, strengths and weaknesses, to just research in general. And for this particular study, it was self-assessment and questionnaire. So more of like a qualitative type of study. And it was only for 16 residents in the curriculum. And things we could have improved on was having a larger group, a larger sample size, for example, and probably stronger knowledge assessments before and afterwards and skills assessments before and afterwards. But it's a great first time pilot study because it highlighted not just nutritional counseling, but incorporating a culinary workshop into a community type of setting, which it hasn't really been done before. And it, kind of leads towards more research ideas in the future. And that's what we're hoping.
I think it's a great idea and it's very exciting for sure.
Are you still practicing family medicine right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm currently in Los Angeles at a office-based environment. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and we've been talking to a bunch of doctors lately who've been using food as medicine and prescribing food as medicine. We had Dr. Weiss on and Jen Hawk, and we've talked to Garth Davis and Dean Ornish about all this kind of stuff. So I'm wondering if you're doing similar things with food with your patients now when you are doing your family medicine practice.
Yeah, so I mainly work in a office type of setting, so mainly outpatient clinics, nothing in the hospital realm. So what I do is basically more emphasis in terms of the counseling sessions, and I see them more frequently. I think a part of changing someone's behavior and lifestyle change is something that we want to emphasize, and not just quick fixes and short-term goals and things like that, but just being able to change someone's lifestyle behavior. 80% of chronic diseases are preventable, but it's really about honing that in, right? So what I do differently is creating more emphasis and more longer time visits with my patients, and having them come back every 2 weeks, to go over their labs with more in-depth counseling, and then just having them come back every 3 months, because not only are we talking about food and nutrition, but we're also talking about physical activity and what other things that we want to be able to mitigate the risks for. So and then in addition to that, I hold workshops, either if it's tied to a conference or if it's tied to a community setting. That's what I try to do as well, in addition to my platform online. So
I think the more support the patients can get, as opposed to just be told, go home and do this, the more outcomes they can have, the more accountability they have, the more community that's created. So they might make a friend and they can start texting each other good recipes that they find, or pictures of the food that they made, and then you can get better results and bring down cholesterol, lose weight. And then after a while, you also start to get people who are coming back who have had results, and then there's social proof. Right? Mm-hmm. Not everybody wants research proof. People want social proof. They want to see a living person that went through it themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of, practicing what you preach, and, talking your walk, and, things like that. And, I find that there's a big gap in health education, right? So for the common man, that doesn't have, the training that we go through, they go to an expert, which is a doctor, right? To be able to seek out that gap of education. But when you go to a doctor and the doctor doesn't have the time, at least in the American, healthcare system, it's just not enough time. It's very volume and production based, and so not only do you not have enough time to teach, like we talked about, doctors aren't really that well trained in terms of nutrition and lifestyle education. So you have a gap that needs to be bridged, and so that is where we need to put more emphasis on as a healthcare system.
Is that why you went to social media and started your podcast, and you're starting to share more and be more available in that respect for patients or for the public? Because I think that's a great move on your part.
Yeah, thank you. The podcast kind of happened accidentally. And when I was, it was a story where my web designer, we were redesigning my website, and he was mentioning about this software that he wanted to convert my audiobook. I wrote a book about enhancing emotional wellness. And so, I started looking into this, and granted, I've actually never really listened to any podcasts before starting mine. And it became more of like a DIY project. And the premise of the podcast was really to create a ripple effect, right? I can only do so much within 4 walls within a one-on-one, patient encounter, or doctor-patient encounter. And so, when you do things like writing articles, writing a book, or doing a podcast like you guys are doing, you're able to expand your networks a lot more broad, a lot more far and wide. So the podcast came because I love having conversations with, my health and wellness, colleagues, and we always have these, gems and insights and aha moments and light bulbs. And so I just figured, why not I share this with, people, and be able to kind of get them, better, credible factual information, especially when social media is so inundated with just a lot of false health claims, a lot of health experts, and it's very we want to be able to disseminate good information, and so
Yeah, it's challenging for a lot of people because nutrition is definitely the most confusing topic on the planet, I believe. And it's hard to know who's right or wrong and who to listen to and what research, really good research, and what's not. And there are a lot of people that have the doctor in front of their name, and they don't always put out the best information. So people really need to be able to decipher where they should be getting their information from, and to have good resources is really, really important for us to have.
definitely, definitely.
Let me ask you a question. Do you ever, suggest to people that they try a plant-based lifestyle and they say, but I can keep eggs, right? I can keep egg whites. There's no problem with that. How would you respond to that?
So I get patients everywhere on the spectrum, you from people who are strictly meat and potatoes to not wanting to change your diet. Those are the same ones where they would rather just take a pill and just go the easy way out. And I have people who are curious, interested, but not know where to turn to. And then you have people that are already in it and just kind of want to hone in their plant-based skills and things like that. So, for me, I don't really preach a diet. I think it's too much of a word that has so many different types of connotations to it. So I tell them, this is where the research is. This is what I practice myself. And I just want you to eat more plants. Less than a quarter of Americans, get their daily, servings of plants and vegetables and fruits, and also fiber. And so we can afford to eat more plants. And I just tell them to minimize animal intake, and this includes meat, dairy, eggs, cheese, things like that. So to answer your question, I kind of do like a tapering effect, if they eat 3 times a day, right? I try to tell them, hey, let's go down to twice. Let's go down to once, let's go down to a couple of times in a week, wherever they fall on the scale, you know what I'm saying? And I even tell them, if you look at the longest living people on earth, which are the blue zones, they're not exactly vegan. They just save, meat for celebratory, events, but, they just save it for very, very few occasions. Whereas Americans in most westernized societies, we just eat it 3 times a day, 365.
So eat meat like cupcakes. No, I'm joking.
Well, we eat cupcakes 3 times a day too.
But
So.
you could eat well, that's why I didn't say donuts. I think donuts are eaten a lot more often than cupcakes.
Yeah,
but absolutely. Going back to what we were talking about before, and in the Chinese diet, and it being more meat is more of a flavoring. It's more of a condiment. It's more of a side dish. It's not necessarily at every meal. But as time goes by, we definitely saw in the 2 years that we were in Hong Kong how Hong Kong society had changed. And again, it's much different than mainland China, but how the Hong Kong society changed and how the restaurants were changing, and, how
all the fast food restaurants started popping up pretty quickly. And
globalization.
Yeah. And I was hospitalized for a while there with pneumonia, which they thought was bird flu, which was a whole other story. Back in 2017. 2007. But, they definitely had vegan congee, but if you didn't ask for it, you would get the pork-based congee kind of thing, right? So you could see how they had the vegan one because that's probably traditionally a little bit more on par, but as time changes and as Western culture begins to penetrate, things really do change. And so does the health.
Yeah. Asian cultures are they were very fascinated with Western society in terms of like trends, brands, just like big names. And as their economy grows and as they become more and more affluent, they are wanting to become, more quote unquote Westernized. So that includes food, right? That includes food and food trends. So, but what they may not know is that it's going to influence them, and it has, right? You can see the rates of obesity and diabetes increase over time with Asian society. So,
And it's not just that. I mean, it's Australian society, it's European society, it's everywhere. Somehow, North American,
They're leading the way.
they're leading the way in good things, and unfortunately in some negative ways as well. But there's people like you. There's lots of people out there where we're trying to make a difference. We're trying to get the information out there. For us, it's so important to spread the message of health, so that nobody has to be in the situation that we were in with Adam's Health a couple of years ago, because they don't have to. You said 80% of diseases are preventable through lifestyle. And if we can prevent them, then we're not just preventing physical illness, we're preventing a lot of mental health issues as well that come out of all of these negative physical health problems when you think you're going to lose someone who you love.
Yeah. I think they're all connected. So, I mean, every patient encounter, I make sure it's not just physical, but their emotional and mental health too. And, it's kind of like steering a ship. The structure of your ship could be sound, the integrity could be sound, but if your captain doesn't really know which way to go and it's not in a clear mindset, you're just wandering aimlessly, so it's the same thing with diet and physical activity and all those other things. You can eat the healthiest diet and move as much as you can, but a positive mindset goes a long way. So
did anything change for you in terms of emotions or physical health when you became plant-based? It sounds like you were running a marathon, so you're already
I'd love to know that. I mean,
health.
You went plant-based after your 2014 marathon, so I'd like to know what the impact was of the nutrition on your physical abilities.
So this was my New York City marathon that I trained for, and before that I wasn't plant-based, and I remembering training for it. And I think when you train for any type of long distance endurance race, you're definitely going to have some aches and pains. And at that time, I've already, changed up how I ran and all that other stuff, and proper shoes, et cetera, et cetera. But the plant-based was, I had a lot of joint pain. I had a lot of back pain, hip pain, knee pain. And after learning about the research and incorporating more and more afterwards, I started to feel my recovery was a lot better, my performance was a lot better, and my joint pains went away. I kind of quit dairy back in 2009, and similarly, it was I had similar effects as well. But everyone is different. I don't have straight up allergies or really, really bad sensitivities. So my ailments were a lot more subtle as opposed to other people who have more of a response, so.
Yeah, Adam stopped asking for as many massages,
I
many
think
salt baths.
the reduction in inflammation and the speed of recovery those are common results that people talk about all the time after starting a plant-based lifestyle. I think it makes a huge difference when you're eating an anti-inflammatory diet, basically, because that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So tell us a little bit about your whole Thrive system and Thrive medicine.
Yeah. So the book is, so I wrote this book about over a period of a year and a half, and it's kind of like part memoir, part, improving emotional wellness and resilience. And it highlights my personal journeys and as well as my professional journeys as a traveling doc. And I, looked at, being a first-generation American, born to Chinese immigrant parents, I had a lot of different varying levels of my childhood. Having both American culture and a Chinese culture, being an eldest son in the family, and then also, just not knowing, kind of figuring out my identity, growing up. And then you have cultural values that, I had to battle with. I had generational values and beliefs. And, all these different things made me who I am. And so I highlighted that in the book because I really felt that there were common themes that we all as people and we all as human beings, go through. For example, how we deal with like love and fear, how we deal with obstacles, how we deal with, moments of just lows. I had a period of depression during my school and residency training, and I highlighted that, battling different things of not being vulnerable enough and not being authentic enough in, our world, especially in our social media world. We can have a very visual exterior, very visual facade, but, what are we behind that, right? And so these are common less talked about themes that, I highlighted in my book. And, I put a lot of personal anecdotes. I put a lot of patient anecdotes in there as well. Of course, I changed all the names. And it's a fun read, very short. I do call to action questions, and I give them space to be able to write and reflect and all that stuff. So it's a fun book to read.
That's excellent. That's fun. We will put a link to that in our show notes at planttrainers.com. And we're also going to put a link to Thrive Bites, your podcast, as well. If there's anywhere that you'd like people to kind of check in with you or see what's going on in your world, where would you like them to go?
My website, chef.zhu.com, and you guys could provide it as well. And I'm pretty active on Instagram and Facebook on being able to connect with a lot of people. And I think the fun part about what I do is having strangers come up to me, whether in person or virtually, and letting me know that something that they've made of a change in a more positive direction. And so that to me is the greatest reward, that you've touched and inspired someone, as opposed to monetary value. So I really enjoy that aspect about what I do. So.
With all your travels and being a mobile doctor, which is kind of crazy and cool, like that seems like such a fun thing to be able to do. But and in your book, you talked about elevating your life. What was like the biggest lesson that you learned of how people can actionably right now start to go in that direction of elevating their own life?
Yeah. So in our world right now, you can easily be subdued to negativity, right? And all the chaos that is presented. Currently right now in America, you have, the impeachment, you have wars going on. We have an increasing population in the plant-based world. We're talking about climate change and the environment. So it's easy to be really subdued and to be very depressed, quote unquote, from all this. I would probably say is it really just kind of starts from you. As I travel, one of the biggest things that I've learned about visiting cultures and visiting people is how much they are willing to be more vulnerable and more authentic, and how much you're able to kind of connect. And I think we are losing that as a society. Is we are more virtually connected, but I think we are more disconnected at the same time. So I think actually reinforcing in relationships, and also improving your own self-care, so relationship with yourself. Having that as a practice, daily, like you guys mentioned, having a, gratitude practice, or having a gratitude, journal, and, just knowing, thyself and being able to, improve upon that. So.
Love it. That's great. Great way to end the show. Thank you so much, Dr. Zhu, for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast.
Thank you guys for having me.